Have you ever stayed? Not because things were okay, but because you didn't want someone you loved to feel alone? This is the story of a father who chose presence over pride. Not to prove anything, but to protect something sacred, the quiet bond between him and his son. Let me take you into a moment. It begins in a quiet kitchen, dimly lit, the clock ticking somewhere in the background. Picture a man standing by the sink, his hands resting on the counter. He isn't moving, not really. Just breathing, thinking, trying not to fall apart. His name is David, and on that night, David discovered something that would change everything he thought he was holding together. It wasn't explosive, there were no slammed doors, no screaming matches. Just a phone left face up on the kitchen island. A message glowing on the screen. It read, "Can't wait to see you again tonight." That idiot won't even notice. You can almost hear the breath catch in David's throat. He didn't touch the phone. Didn't scroll. He just stared at the screen like it was a wildfire starting right there in front of him. And in a way, it was. Because the woman he had built his life around, Jessica, had just confirmed what his heart had been whispering for weeks. She was seeing someone else. And worse, she thought so little of him, she didn't even bother to hide it anymore. Now David's not the kind of man to explode. He's not loud. He's quiet in the way steady men are. The kind of quiet that listens. That absorbs. That hopes. Even when it hurts. So that night, while Jessica was out, running errands, David sat alone in their kitchen. One hand cupping a cold cup of coffee. The other pressing against his chest like he was trying to hold his own heart in place. The house was still. Too still. Upstairs, the soft whir of a ceiling fan. Down the hall, a nightlight humming in his son's room. 10-year-old Liam, who had gone to bed early after watching a movie with his dad, completely unaware that the world beneath their roof was coming undone. David didn't sleep that night. He didn't even cry. He just sat there, holding on to the last breath of a dream he didn't want to lose. The next morning, Jessica came home before sunrise. She moved through the kitchen with the kind of casual coldness that only someone deeply disconnected can carry. No guilt, no explanation, just a quick kiss on Liam's head and a glance at David like he was part of the wallpaper. David wanted to say something. He did, but when he looked into his son's sleepy eyes, saw the way that little boy smiled up at his mom, he couldn't do it. Because as much as his heart was breaking, there was something else sitting heavier on his chest. David wanted his son to have a family. A full one. A home that didn't fracture down the middle. And so, he said nothing. He swallowed his pain, nodded when Jessica said she was just tired, and poured Liam some cereal like it was just another Tuesday. That morning would set the tone for the weeks that followed. David became quieter, more inward, watching more than speaking, noticing the subtle ways Jessica had started slipping away. The way she stopped asking about his day. How she avoided touching him in the kitchen. How her laugh, once real and full, now only appeared when she was texting. But every night, when he tucked Liam into bed, David would pause. He would brush Liam's hair back, kiss his forehead, and whisper, "You've got a good heart, kiddo." Never let anyone dim that light. And in those moments, David convinced himself that enduring this pain was worth it. That keeping the illusion alive, for Liam, was a kind of love. A sacrifice. He thought maybe, just maybe, if he was patient enough, strong enough, things would change. That Jessica would remember. That she would come back. But deep down, David knew. The kind of silence that had crept into their home. It doesn't go away on its own. One night, about 2 weeks after the message, David came home to find Jessica in the backyard. She was on the phone. Laughing. Not the tired, forced kind of laugh she used with him. But the kind of laugh she hadn't shared in months. He stood by the back door, watching her silhouette in the porch light. Her head tilted, her hand twirling the cord of her hoodie. You could see it clear as day. She wasn't his anymore. And yet, that night, David still washed the dishes. Still packed Liam's school lunch. Still checked the locks on every door before turning out the lights. Because sometimes, the greatest heartbreak isn't what someone does to you. It's what you choose to endure, silently, for the people you love. But even the strongest silence has a breaking point. And David was getting closer to his. This was the cost of one-sided love. The kind where you stay, even when your heart's already gone. The kind where you hope so loudly on the inside, it drowns out the truth right in front of you. We're just getting started. David's story doesn't end here. It's only beginning. David tried to forget that message, tried to fold it into some corner of his mind and lock it away. He told himself it was a moment of weakness, that Jessica was confused, that if he just stayed calm, stayed patient, things would return to normal. But the thing about trust is, once it's cracked, it doesn't heal on its own. And in their house, the cracks were growing. It started with the little things. Jessica stopped saying goodnight. She stopped laughing at David's dry jokes. The way she used to nudge his arm when he was being silly? That disappeared, too. And her phone? It was never out of reach. She would take it with her even to the bathroom. Lock it when she set it down. Tilt the screen away if David happened to walk by. One night, David was cleaning up dinner when Jessica said she was going for a walk. Just a short one, she said. To clear her head. She didn't take the dog. David watched her from the kitchen window, saw her get into the car instead. She drove off fast, not the kind of drive that says, I need air. It said, I need escape. He stood there long after the headlights disappeared, hands wet from the sink, chest heavy. He didn't follow. He didn't call. He just stood there. Let the silence answer what he didn't dare ask. A few days later, he found a scarf in the laundry. One he didn't recognize. Expensive, not Jessica's style. It smelled like cologne, and when he asked about it, she barely looked up from her phone. Just said, I borrowed it from a friend. But David knew every one of Jessica's friends. He didn't press. That's the thing about pain. Sometimes it's not sharp. Sometimes it's just this slow, dull ache that wears you down, moment by moment. And David was wearing thin. Liam noticed, too. The boy had always been bright, sensitive. He started watching his parents more closely, asking quieter questions. One night, while David was helping him with homework, Liam looked up and asked, Why doesn't Mom eat dinner with us anymore? David smiled, said something about her being tired from work, but Liam wasn't fooled. He nodded, then went quiet. The kind of quiet that holds in more than it lets out. And that silence, it lived in their house like a second shadow. Jessica started coming home later and later. Some nights, she would be gone when Liam went to bed and still not there when David woke up. When he asked where she was, she snapped, You don't own me, David. It wasn't the words, it was the coldness, the emptiness behind them, like he was a stranger sharing her kitchen. That night, David didn't eat. Couldn't. He sat on the edge of the bed staring at the dresser. Her side was empty. No photos. No hairbrush. Just absence. It's strange how loud absence can be. He started talking to himself. Not out loud, but in the way people do when they're trying to convince their own hearts not to break. You're doing this for Liam. Just hold on. It's a phase. She's just overwhelmed. But deep down, David knew. He could feel it in the way her hugs vanished. In the way she looked past him, like he was standing in front of the TV. In the way she flinched when he reached for her hand. Whatever love had been there, wasn't anymore. One evening, Liam came home from school with a drawing. It was a picture of their family. 3 stick figures. David, Liam, and someone new. A taller figure, smiling next to Jessica. David asked who it was. Liam hesitated, then said, That's Ryan. He brought Mom ice cream once. She said he was funny. And just like that, a name was given to the ghost David had been chasing in silence. Jessica wasn't even hiding it anymore. The crack hadn't just widened. It had split straight through the foundation. Still, David stayed. He stayed because he believed in redemption. He stayed because he believed in family. He stayed because he didn't know what else to do. But something had shifted. The air in the house felt different now. Colder, heavier. And David was no longer just hurting. He was changing. Something inside him was starting to harden. Not out of hate, not even out of anger, but out of survival. And that shift? That quiet shift inside? It was the beginning of the end. And the first breath of something new. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about being pushed aside. It's quiet, slow, so gradual, you don't even notice at first. But one morning, David woke up and realized he was no longer part of the picture. It started with Liam's birthday. David had always been the one to plan everything. The cake, the games, the treasure hunts in the backyard. It was their thing. But this year, Jessica planned it all without saying a word. She booked a venue without asking. Invited people David didn't even recognize. And when the day came, She barely looked at him. He stood near the snack table, holding a plate of half-eaten pizza, watching Liam laugh with other kids. Jessica moved through the room like a hostess. Smiling, polished, effortless. And then, get this, he saw Ryan. There, in the back, laughing with Jessica's sister, holding a soda like he belonged. Oh my gosh. David felt something in his chest sink. Liam ran up to him, eyes bright, holding a toy car. Mom said Ryan got this for me. He knew it was my favorite. And David? He just nodded. That's great, buddy. That really is. No one asked David to take pictures that year. No one handed him the cake knife. No one even noticed when he stepped outside, pretending to take a phone call. He just needed air. After that, things got worse. He noticed little shifts. Jessica started correcting him in front of Liam. If David said something, she'd jump in with, "Actually, Liam, what your dad means is." She rolled her eyes more often. Sighed loudly when he entered a room. At dinner, she'd serve Liam first, herself second, and forget David altogether. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was deliberate. And Liam, poor Liam, he was caught in the middle. You could see it in the way he looked at both of them. Like he was trying to read the room before he chose who to sit with. Sometimes, he'd whisper things like, "Mom gets mad when I talk about you." Or, "She says you're always sad." David never talked back, never blamed Jessica in front of Liam. He just listened, nodded, swallowed it all down. Until one evening, everything cracked. They were at the dinner table. Liam was talking about a drawing he made at school. Something with a volcano and a dinosaur. David laughed and said, "You've always loved volcanoes. Remember the trip to the science center?" Jessica didn't look up from her phone. He doesn't remember that. He was 4. Her tone? Dismissive, sharp. David smiled gently and said, "Still, it was a good day." Jessica finally looked up, cold. "Why do you always cling to the past, David? It's pathetic." Liam froze. David's hands curled under the table. He could feel the blood rise in his ears. But he kept his voice steady. "I was just remembering something good. That's all." Jessica laughed. A humorless, hollow laugh. "Well, maybe if you focused on the present, you wouldn't be so miserable." Liam stood up, his voice small. "Can I go to my room now?" Jessica didn't even answer. David nodded. "Yeah, buddy, go ahead." And as Liam walked away, David felt something break inside. It wasn't just about Jessica anymore. It was about the space growing between him and his son. A space she was building. One cold remark at a time. One missed dinner at a time. David wasn't just being ignored. He was being erased. That night, he went to Liam's room. The boy was curled up in bed, still awake. David sat beside him and asked, gently, "Did something I say tonight make you uncomfortable?" Liam shook his head. "I just don't like it when you two fight. I feel like I have to choose." David closed his eyes. Oh, he wanted to say, "You don't." He wanted to promise it would get better. But what good are promises when the foundation is already broken? So instead, he said, "I love you. Always. No matter what. You never have to choose." Liam didn't speak. He just nodded, pulled the blanket up, turned toward the wall, and David sat there for a long time, watching his son breathe, listening to the quiet, feeling more alone than he ever had before. He wasn't the villain in this house. He wasn't perfect either, but slowly, carefully, deliberately, he was being written out of his own family. And the man who once built everything for love was being left behind by the very people he loved the most. Not with cruelty, but with silence. There's something strange about the moment everything falls apart. It rarely comes with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes, it's just a sentence. One small, careless sentence that slips through the cracks and shatters everything. That moment came for David on a Tuesday evening. It had been a long day. Work was draining. The air outside still held a summer heaviness. And inside the house, it was even heavier. Jessica had picked up Liam from school. David had stayed late finishing up a project. When he walked through the door, Liam was on the couch, eating a sandwich. Jessica was nowhere in sight. David smiled, dropped his keys in the bowl near the door, and asked, "Hey buddy, how was your day?" Liam looked up, chewing slowly. Then he said it. 6 words. 6 soft words that didn't belong to a 10-year-old. "Mom says you're not a man." David froze. Just froze. You could hear the refrigerator humming in the background. A car passing outside. The world kept moving. But David? He stood perfectly still. He didn't ask Liam to repeat it. He didn't even ask why. Because the look in Liam's eyes said everything. He didn't mean it with anger or spite. He just repeated something he had overheard. Maybe in passing. Maybe late at night, behind a wall. David walked over, slowly, and sat beside him on the couch. He didn't scold him, didn't raise his voice. He just asked gently, "What do you think that means?" Liam shrugged. "I don't know," she said. "Real men don't cry. Real men don't stay when they're not wanted." Oh my gosh, that was when David knew. Not just that Jessica was poisoning their son against him, but that Liam was starting to believe it. David looked down at his hands. Those same hands had built Liam's first crib, held him through croup and chickenpox, fixed every broken toy, packed every school lunch. Hands that trembled now, not from anger, but from heartbreak. "Do you think I'm not a man?" he asked, barely more than a whisper. Liam shook his head. "I think you're nice. I think you're quiet." Then after a pause, he added, "But Mom says, nice means weak." There it was again, another little knife. Jessica wasn't just pulling away anymore. She was rewriting the narrative, turning David's kindness into something shameful. And Liam? He was caught in the middle of a war he never chose. A war he didn't even know he was in. That night, after Liam fell asleep, David walked outside. The air was thick, crickets chirping in the distance. The neighborhood quiet and tucked into itself. David sat on the back steps, hands resting on his knees. And for the first time in months, he cried. He let it happen. No hiding, no swallowing it down, just silent tears, falling onto worn jeans. Because honestly, he didn't know what else to do. He wasn't angry. Not really. He was tired, so deeply tired of holding it all in. He thought about leaving, packing a bag, driving somewhere, anywhere. But then he thought about Liam, and how even now, even with all the noise Jessica was feeding him, that little boy had looked him in the eye and said, "I think you're nice." That was the thread, the one thing still holding David to this world. And he wasn't going to let Jessica cut that too. The next morning, he made a decision. No, not a dramatic one. Not some explosive exit. Something quieter, stronger. He got up early, made breakfast for Liam, eggs, toast, a sliced apple on the side, just the way he liked. Jessica didn't come downstairs. David didn't call her. He sat across from his son and asked about math class. They laughed about spelling words. Talked about a movie they could watch Friday night. For a few minutes, it felt normal. And when Liam picked up his backpack and headed for the door, David knelt beside him and said, "You know something?" Liam tilted his head. David smiled. "Kind isn't weak. Kind takes guts." Liam didn't say anything, but he nodded, and that was enough. Jessica was still upstairs when David left for work. Still asleep, or pretending to be. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't leave a note. He just walked out the front door with a quiet heart and a decision already blooming in his chest. He wasn't going to let himself be erased. Not for being kind, not for staying, and especially, not for loving his son in a way that would teach him how to become a man worth remembering. Because in the end, that's the real legacy. Not the fights we win. Not the pride we protect. But the hearts we raise. And David? He was done being silent. The world may not have heard him yet, but his son just had. And that was where the healing would begin. Healing doesn't start with a miracle. It starts with something small. A choice. A single moment where you decide, enough. For David, that moment came the day he stopped waiting for Jessica to change. It didn't look heroic. There was no music swelling in the background. Just a man standing in front of his bathroom mirror, staring at his own tired eyes. The morning light barely cutting through the blinds. A toothbrush in his hand, paused mid-air. And for the first time in months, he asked himself, what if it's not weakness to walk away from pain? That was the spark. Not a fire yet, but the beginning. He started small. David went back to the gym. Not because he wanted abs or attention, but because his body felt like it had forgotten how to carry him. The first run on the treadmill nearly broke him. His knees ached, his chest burned, but he showed up the next day. And the one after that, he remembered how good it felt to sweat, to move, to feel alive again. He joined a men's group at church. Not for prayer at first, but for quiet, for space, for eye contact with other people who looked just as tired as he felt. One evening, they shared stories. And David, carefully, told a little of his own. He didn't name names, didn't vent or rant, He just said, I stayed longer than I should've. I thought I was doing it for my son. But I think I was afraid to start over. Someone in the group, an older man with gray around his temples, nodded and said, sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's getting up the next day and choosing to keep going. And that line stuck with David. At home, he began drawing clearer lines. He stopped chasing Jessica, stopped asking where she'd been, stopped explaining himself. Instead, he redirected all that energy to Liam. They started going on evening walks together. Around the block, down to the little duck pond nearby. They didn't talk about the tension in the house. They talked about stars, baseball, what Liam wanted to be when he grew up. And in that space, something began to grow. A trust, a quiet rhythm between father and son. One night, walking back from the pond, Liam reached up and took David's hand without saying a word. And David felt the warmth of it go straight to his chest. Jessica noticed the change. She didn't like it. She became colder, shorter, more dismissive. But David didn't flinch anymore. He didn't rise to the bait. Didn't try to win her back. He just stayed steady, quiet, strong. He started cooking again. Meals he liked. Meals Liam liked. He cleaned out the garage. Donated boxes of old things, some of them tied to memories that used to hurt. And slowly, the house began to feel less like a battleground and more like a transition. A place they were passing through. Not forever, just until they were ready for what came next. There was one night, about 2 months after that conversation with Liam. David was reading in bed when he heard a soft knock. It was Liam. He padded in, pajamas rumpled, hair sticking up on one side. Dad, can I sleep in here tonight? David smiled and nodded. Liam crawled into bed, tucked himself under the blanket, and whispered, I like it better when it's just us. Oh, those words didn't hurt. They healed. They told David that Liam wasn't lost. He was still here, still watching, still feeling, and maybe, just maybe, he was learning what love looks like, when it refuses to disappear. David didn't have all the answers. He didn't know exactly when he'd leave, or how custody would work, or what the next chapter would bring. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of those questions. He was ready to find out, because in the ashes of what was, a small fire had started. And David? He was no longer sitting in the dark. He was building something new, not just for himself, but for the boy who still reached for his hand in silence. And for the man he was finally beginning to remember he could be. This wasn't revenge, not the loud kind, anyway, but it was redemption, quiet, earned, burning just enough to light the way forward. And honestly, that was more powerful than any fire Jessica could have lit, because this one was his. It was supposed to be just another weekend. David had promised Liam they'd go to the local fair. Nothing fancy, just father and son, Ferris wheels, corn dogs, maybe a funnel cake if they were lucky. The place was buzzing, kids laughing, music playing, the kind of joy that hums in the background and makes the world feel a little less heavy. David had just bought them tickets when it happened. He heard a voice behind him. Well, didn't think I'd see you here. That voice, that smirk baked right into the tone. He turned around slowly, and there he was, Ryan, standing like he owned the place, wearing designer sunglasses and a button-up shirt too crisp for a county fair. And yet, something was off. You could see it in his posture. The overcompensating smile, the way he kept shifting his weight like he couldn't quite land. David nodded politely. Ryan. Liam glanced up at them, a little confused. Ryan smiled at the boy, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're getting big, champ. I remember when you were this tall. David kept his voice calm. We've got a ride to catch. Ryan laughed, short and stiff. You always were the boring one, David. No wonder Jess needed variety. Oh, honestly, in the past, that would have gutted him. But now it just sounded sad. David looked Ryan in the eye. You know what's not boring, Ryan? Showing up, being consistent, loving someone even when it's hard. Ryan blinked. David stepped closer, not to threaten, just so he could lower his voice. You might have had her attention for a while, but you never had her respect. And you sure as hell never earned my son's. Liam was still watching, quiet, processing. David turned and walked away. Just like that, no drama, no mic drop, just peace. Later that evening, after they'd ridden every ride twice and split a greasy funnel cake, David and Liam sat on a bench watching the light spin. Liam nudged his dad. Was that Ryan? David nodded. He used to come around a lot. Liam looked down at his shoes. I didn't like how he talked to you. David smiled. That's okay. Some people talk loud because they're trying to cover up how small they feel inside. Liam thought about that for a second. You don't talk loud. David shook his head. I don't need to. And that was the difference. David didn't need to win in public. He'd already won something quieter. Something bigger. His son's trust. His own self-worth. And honestly, Ryan couldn't even see the scoreboard. A few days later, David heard through a mutual friend that Ryan's job had fallen through. The startup he had joined? Collapsed. The apartment he bragged about? Gone. Apparently, Jessica wasn't returning his calls. Wow. The man who once mocked David for being too soft now had nowhere to land. And David? He felt nothing. No victory dance. No smug satisfaction. Just a quiet affirmation that grace, real grace, means not needing to watch someone else fall to feel like you've risen. Because you already have. David poured that energy into rebuilding. He picked up a part-time gig teaching basic carpentry at the local rec center. Something he used to love, back before life got complicated. He brought Liam along one Saturday, taught him how to measure and cut, how to be careful with his hands but confident with his choices. They built a birdhouse. It wasn't perfect, one side slanted a little, but Liam looked up and said, "We made something. Just us." David smiled. That's right, just us. And the thing is, sometimes the best kind of comeback isn't flashy. It doesn't go viral. It doesn't sting or explode or humiliate anyone. Sometimes, it just looks like a boy hammering in the last nail beside his father. Like a man laughing again, genuinely, without bitterness in his chest. Like peace that doesn't need to be posted, and forgiveness that doesn't require permission. That's what winning looks like. And David? He was finally living it. Not for revenge, but for redemption, for what he built from the inside out, and the quiet, undeniable truth that the one who mocked him was never even in the race. Some moments don't need grand announcements. They arrive quietly, but leave a mark you never forget. For David, it started with a text from Jessica. Can we talk? He stared at it for a long time, not because he didn't expect it, but because part of him had already let go. Still, he agreed. They met at a small cafe near downtown, the kind with chipped mugs and soft jazz playing from the corner speakers. David got there first, chose a table by the window, and waited. When Jessica walked in, something about her looked smaller, not physically, but in energy, in posture, like someone who wasn't used to being the one asking anymore. She smiled, half-heartedly, and sat down. Hi. David nodded. Hi. There was a pause, long enough to notice the way she stirred her coffee even though it was already blended. You look well, she said. I am. And he meant it. Jessica looked down, fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater. I heard about your classes at the rec center. Liam told me you two built a birdhouse. David smiled gently. He's good with his hands. Another pause, longer this time. Then she said it. I made a mistake. Not loud, not dramatic, just, there. David didn't flinch. Yeah. Jessica looked up sharply. That's all? Just, yeah. David set his cup down carefully. You're not the first person to realize something too late, Jess. She winced at the old nickname. I thought things with Ryan would be different. David stayed quiet. But he wasn't you. Oh, honestly? That used to be something he wished she would say. But now, it just felt like watching someone chase a train that already left the station. Jessica leaned in slightly. Do you think there's still a chance? For us? David looked at her, not with anger, not even with resentment, just clarity. He took a slow breath. What we had, it mattered. But what we lost, that matters too. Jessica's eyes welled a little. So that's it? David shook his head softly. No, that's not it. He reached across the table and gently placed his hand on hers. We're always going to be Liam's parents. That bond doesn't break. She nodded slowly. But you and I? David pulled his hand back, folded it around his coffee cup again. You and I are different now. And I've learned how to stand on my own. Jessica blinked hard, bit her lip, then whispered, You sound like someone I used to want to be. David gave her a sad smile. You used to be. And then, he stood. She stood too. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They shook hands. But you know what? That handshake. It didn't carry warmth anymore. It was polite, final, like two people acknowledging what once was and what could never be again. That night, David told Liam they had talked. The boy listened quietly, then asked, "Is she coming back?" David knelt beside him. "No, buddy. But we're okay. We've got our own kind of home now." Liam leaned in. "I like it when you make pancakes." David laughed softly. "Me too." And that was that. Not a grand closure. Just the kind that fits in a quiet kitchen, with morning light through the blinds, and a boy waiting for breakfast. Sometimes, the people who leave try to come back, but by then, you're not the same person who would have said yes. And that's not cold, it's clarity, the kind you earn. David didn't win by taking Jessica back. He won by knowing he didn't need to. Because the fire that once burned him now only warmed the room where he and his son lived. And the past? It belonged to another man. A man who no longer needed to prove anything. Not to her. Not to the world. Not even to himself. Some of the most powerful lessons, you don't teach them on purpose. They happen in moments, quiet ones, where you're just living life, and someone smaller is watching. David didn't set out to raise Liam into a different kind of man. But he did. It started with a Saturday morning. Cool breeze drifting in through the kitchen window. The smell of pancakes and old music playing low on the radio. Liam was sitting at the table, coloring. And David? He was just present, not checking his phone, not thinking about what Jessica was doing. Just there, flipping pancakes and asking his son about his drawings. Liam looked up at him and said, "Do you think I'll be a good dad one day?" Oh my gosh. David nearly dropped the spatula. He turned slowly, searching Liam's face. "Why do you ask that?" Liam shrugged. "You're a good one. I want to be like you." That was the kind of sentence that rewrites a man's soul. David didn't get emotional right then. He just knelt beside Liam, looked him in the eyes, and said, "You already are. Every time you choose to be kind. Every time you ask questions instead of assuming. Every time you listen. That's what makes a man worth following." Liam nodded, smiled, went back to coloring, and just like that, another seed was planted. Later that week, something happened at school. Liam got into an argument with another kid. Apparently, the boy had been teasing a girl in their class. Liam stepped in, told him to stop. Things got heated. There was shoving, some shouting. David got the call from the principal. When Liam came home, he was nervous, expecting punishment, but David sat him down on the edge of the couch and said, "Tell me everything." Liam explained. No excuses, just honesty. David listened, then nodded. Standing up for someone else? That takes courage, but next time, use your words. Don't give them a reason to paint you as the problem. Liam nodded, and then David said something Liam would remember for years. Being strong doesn't mean being loud. It means staying rooted when the wind blows. Wow. That's the kind of thing you want etched into your kid's memory. Not just lessons about chores or school, but lessons about integrity, grace, boundaries. David wasn't perfect, but he showed up, even on days when the past crept in. Even when co-parenting with Jessica felt like walking on glass. He chose to model what it meant to keep moving. What it looked like to set boundaries without being cruel. What forgiveness could look like when you didn't owe anyone closure. There was one night, Liam was doing homework at the table. David was cooking dinner, still wearing his work shirt, sleeves rolled up, face a little tired. Liam looked up and asked, "Why don't you ever yell like some dads do?" David smiled, stirred the pot, then said, "Because I remember what it felt like to be yelled at. And I promised myself I'd never make you feel that small." Oh, you could have heard a pin drop. Liam nodded, quietly, almost reverently. They didn't say much more that night, but something shifted, another layer of trust, sealed in silence. And over time, these moments stacked up. Liam started checking in on his friends more. Started asking thoughtful questions. He held the door for strangers. He said, "Thank you," without being told. And one afternoon, when David caught a glimpse of him helping a younger kid who dropped his backpack in the school parking lot, he didn't say a word. He just smiled, because he knew, that wasn't about manners. That was about character. And character? That's what lasts. Years later, when people would say, "You raised a good one," David wouldn't puff his chest or take the credit. He'd just smile, that quiet smile. The one that says, "I stayed when it was hard. I chose love when it wasn't returned. I spoke gently when I had every reason to shout." And now, His son speaks gently too. That's legacy. Not something you give your child once, but something you live, every day, even in the smallest, simplest ways. And that's exactly what David did. He didn't teach Liam how to be a man. He showed him, one quiet act at a time. Sometimes, new beginnings don't arrive with fireworks. They show up slowly, quietly, like a gentle knock on a door you thought would never open again. For David, that knock came in the form of a woman named Sarah. He met her through the rec center. She ran the Saturday art classes for kids, watercolors, clay, paper crafts, that kind of thing. The first time they spoke, it was nothing more than a polite hello while picking up Liam and her daughter, Maya. But it happened again the next week, and again the week after that, and soon, those polite hellos turned into short conversations, little check-ins. How's your week going? How's Liam adjusting to the new school year? Nothing big, nothing fast, just two people, noticing. One afternoon, as David helped Liam carry a cardboard rocket ship out of class, Sarah smiled and said, "You know, you're a really present dad." And David paused. That word, present, not nice, not stable, present. He hadn't heard that one before, and for some reason, it meant more than she knew. They didn't jump into anything. Both of them had been through enough to know that real connection isn't built in a rush. They started talking over coffee, outside the center, in public places. They swapped stories, cautiously at first. Sarah had been divorced 3 years. Her ex had been charming in public, dismissive in private. She said she stayed too long because she wanted Maya to have a home. David nodded. He understood that line better than most. And you know what? There was no judgment in their conversations. No fixing. Just listening. And over time, something gentle began to unfold. The first time Sarah and Maya came over for dinner, David made too much spaghetti. The kitchen was messy. The dog wouldn't stop barking. And it was perfect. Liam and Maya got along right away, laughing, comparing school projects, asking for more garlic bread. And when the kids went to watch a movie in the other room, David and Sarah sat on the couch. No TV, no distractions, just the sound of kids laughing in the background. Sarah looked around and said, "This place feels calm. Like, honest." David smiled. That's the goal, because he wasn't building a mansion. He was building peace. One night, a few weeks later, Liam asked, "Is Sarah your girlfriend?" David raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you hear that term?" Liam grinned. "Maya said it, said you guys laugh a lot." David chuckled. "Well, we're getting to know each other. What do you think about that?" Liam paused. "She makes you look happy. You smile more now." "Oh." David wasn't expecting that. "Do you like having her around?" Liam nodded. "Yeah, it's not weird. It's good weird. Good weird." That was all the approval he needed. David didn't rush anything. They didn't move in together right away. Didn't force the families to merge. They let it happen naturally. Some weekends together, some apart, one birthday party at a time. And through it all, David kept checking in with Liam, not just about Sarah, but about life, how he was feeling, what he needed, because the one thing David promised himself was never to let love come at the cost of clarity. No secrets, no guessing games, just a house where people said what they meant, and meant what they said. Years later, when Sarah moved in, it wasn't some grand event. It was a Sunday, overcast sky, boxes in the back of her car, and the kids helping unload like it was just another game. They put her books on the shelf, hung Maya's art in the hallway, made tacos for dinner and watched a documentary about sea turtles. It was ordinary, and that's what made it so extraordinary. Because for the first time in a long time, David wasn't watching his back, wasn't managing anyone's moods, wasn't hiding how tired he felt at the end of a long day. He was just living, with people who chose him, and showed it, in actions, in laughter, in quiet nights without tension. He once thought a home had to look a certain way. 2 parents, perfect holidays, matching smiles in framed photos. But now, he knew better. A real home is where the truth can breathe, where no one's love depends on your silence. And the people under your roof, they don't just live with you. They see you, and love you, right there in the light. There's something sacred about stillness. Not the kind that comes from giving up, but the kind you earn after you've walked through fire and chosen not to burn others with it. David sat on the edge of a quiet campsite, a soft wind brushing past his jacket. Liam sat beside him, legs tucked up, a blanket draped over his shoulders. They had come out here just the two of them. No distractions, no noise, just a father and son under a sky full of stars. You could hear the fire crackling. You could almost smell the wood smoke curling in the night air. And David? He wasn't thinking about Jessica. Not anymore. He wasn't wondering what she thought, or whether she regretted anything, or who she might have become. Honestly, he just didn't need that answer anymore. Liam poked the fire with a stick, watched the embers dance. Dad? David turned toward him. Yeah, buddy? What's the hardest thing you've ever done? Oh, that question landed softly, but deep. David thought about it. He could have said divorce. He could have said betrayal. But instead, he said, learning to stay kind when everything in me wanted to shut down. Liam nodded. Is that why you're quiet a lot? David smiled. Sometimes, quiet helps me listen to what matters. Liam looked up. I like your quiet. It feels safe. Wow. Those words wrapped around David's heart like warmth. He reached over and gently rested his hand on Liam's shoulder. You know what kept me going through everything? Liam shook his head. You. Just you. I wanted to be the kind of man you could look at and say, that's how I want to treat people. Liam smiled. They sat like that for a long while. The fire crackling, the stars glowing overhead, no one chasing answers, no one proving anything, just presence, just peace. You know, there's this idea that revenge has to be loud. That to prove your worth, you've got to make others feel small. But David? He rewrote that story. He turned pain into patience, abandonment into attention, and silence into sanctuary. Years ago, he was standing in a kitchen alone, heartbroken, forgotten, questioning everything. And now, he was here, with the boy who still called him Dad, who still reached for his hand when crossing the road, who still saw him, not as a man who was left behind, but as the man who stayed. Stayed soft, stayed steady, stayed true. And get this, that little campfire moment? It didn't go viral, it didn't change the world, but it changed theirs. David didn't rebuild his life to prove Jessica wrong. He rebuilt it to show Liam what love looks like when it doesn't run. What it looks like when it cooks dinner, folds laundry, listens without fixing. What it looks like when it loses, and still chooses to rise. Eventually, Liam leaned against him, head on his shoulder, blanket pulled tight, and David looked out over the trees, the stars, the glowing fire, and knew this was enough. He didn't need the woman who walked away. He didn't need the apology that never came. He didn't even need to win. Because he had peace. He had purpose. He had a son who admired the man he'd become, not because he fought back, but because he forgave forward. And that's a victory no one can take away. So if you've ever been broken and had to rebuild with trembling hands, if you've ever stayed when it was easier to run, if you've ever chosen presence over pride, then you already know what David knows now. You don't need the past to come back. You just need to carry the fire forward, with those who never asked you to burn. And in the end, that's the story that matters most. In the end, David didn't win by getting her back. He didn't win by revenge or by proving her wrong. He won by choosing peace over pride, by showing his son what it means to be strong without shouting, and by building a life rooted in truth, not noise. If you see yourself somewhere in this story, I hope you remember, healing doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just choosing to stay kind, when you could have walked away. Tell us how this story landed for you in the comments, and if it speaks to something in you, consider subscribing. We walk these roads together. If you'd like to support the stories we tell, the super thanks button is always there. Because giving is also a part of healing.